We are here to address concerns and questions about coyotes and their interactions with people and pets. There is a lot of information and misinformation circulating online and in our community. Council and staff have committed to providing residents with the most accurate and up-to-date information that we can. We understand that coyotes can elicit strong feelings, and we respectfully ask that everyone channel that passion into providing constructive comments and questions. Tonight's agenda consists of Zoom-related instructions, panelist introductions, a presentation from the town on the Coyote education and response procedure, and the science of coyotes by Coyote Watch Canada. We'll answer questions with the remaining time, and we'll start that Q&A session with questions that have already been submitted by a number of participants. The meeting will end at 8:30. Please know that this session is being recorded, so anyone who is not able to participate will be able to have an opportunity to watch the session at their convenience. The recording will be made available tomorrow on the Town of Oakville website at www.oakville.ca. For those of you who aren't familiar with Zoom, as an attendee, you cannot be seen or heard by either us or another participant. We will invite you to submit questions through the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen. The icon location may vary depending on the device that you're using. We will be monitoring the Q&A to collect questions for response by the panelists. For anyone joining by phone, or if you have questions or comments after the session, please feel free to send those to Municipal Enforcement Services by email at enforcement@oakville.ca. I'll provide this again later in the session. If by chance the question you've submitted has not been answered today, please know that we're recording all of the questions and comments for consideration. So tonight we have with us Jim Barry, Director of Municipal Enforcement Services, Margaret Boswell, Supervisor of Enforcement Services, Marnie Sharpen, Municipal Standards Investigator, Sean Elliott, Municipal Standards Investigator, Caitlin Jones, Mobile Compliance Officer, Brett McNally, Web Coordinator. Now, Brett will be reviewing all of your questions as they come in. He'll be collecting like questions, and he may reword them for response by the panelists. So if your question's not exactly word for word, it's because we're covering several questions in one. Leslie Sampson, she's the founding executive director with Coyote Watch Canada. Eva Bobak, she's the integrated resource management technical specialist with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Now, some members of council are also joining us tonight. They're listening to make sure they hear all of your questions and concerns. So with that said, we'll get started with our first presentation by Margaret Boswell on the Coyote education and response procedure.
Good evening, everybody. Just put my glasses on. Thank you for everybody who has joined our meeting today. It's of a particular interest to many community members, so I'm very pleased that everyone was able to join us today. As mentioned, my name is Margaret Boswell, and I'm the Supervisor of Enforcement, and I oversee the Coyote program in Oakville. I'm here today to provide you with a brief overview of the town's Coyote program, which is being developed to support the community in coexistence with wildlife and coyotes. As part of the presentation, information will be provided on the Coyote program in Oakville, the roles and responsibilities of partners connected to our program, and the Coyote education and response procedure and town program. The town's Coyote coexistence program is overseen by the Municipal Enforcement Department, which provides the community with more on-the-ground resources to support the community using the following tools: municipal bylaws, Coyote reporting form, investigations conducted by municipal enforcement officers, access to external partners such as Coyote Watch Canada, Oakville Green, and the MNR, installation of signage in parks and trails to alert patrons of the presence of coyotes, and outreach and education. The role of maintaining coexistence of people, pets, and wildlife becomes a group effort. Each partner involved in this group plays. We could call it a play because we are in partnership and we are maintaining a role, all of us. We all maintain the important role in working towards this balance. The town helps facilitate these roles so that the community receives the support through education and so that we can all live in coexistence with wildlife. The town has identified the following groups as our partners: Oakville Humane Society, property owners, external agencies such as Coyote Watch Canada and Oakville Green, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and Halton Regional Police. Let's go through what the groups listed are responsible for. The town of Oakville, of course, is responsible for the investigations as outlined in our coyote response strategy, maintaining the coyote tracking form and relevant data, community outreach and public engagement, and we oversee the coyote education and response procedure, and installing signage and managing secure garbage bins in parks. Property owners also have a responsibility, and that would be managing coyotes on their own property, removing attractants for wildlife and coyotes, and educating yourself and your family. The Oakville Humane Society is responsible for attending to sick or injured animals, including coyotes, enforcement of town bylaws related to domestic pets, for example, pets off leash, and removal of dead animals from public roadways. We also leverage external partners to assist with scientific expertise, community education and hazing techniques, and investigations. The Ministry of Natural Resources assists with policy and legislation and supports with educational materials. And lastly, Halton Regional Police Services, who assist in situations where there are immediate threats to personal safety. They are the only agency of the group that are permitted to use firearms. Through good teamwork, we can all help in making ourselves and empower ourselves and community to live in coexistence with wildlife. In order to further assist residents understand the Coyote program in Oakville, staff have developed a Coyote education and response procedure. This procedure incorporates strategies that directly address the primary reasons coyotes come into conflict with people and looks to define each report type with a level of a response attached to it. Emphasis for the program is focused on public education and awareness and responding appropriately when interacting with wildlife. Key preventative practices such as limiting food, shelter, water, and avoiding leaving small pets unattended or roaming free are key to minimizing potential negative interactions between people, pets, and coyotes. The Coyote response strategy chart also sets out clearly the town response to incidents with coyotes. This framework will address concerns raised by the community that it was unclear if the town would, and provides a clear direction as to how the town would proceed based on that scenario. This simplified approach provides greater clarity to the public and supports current education and communication programs in responding to public concerns with coyotes. The reporting tool was introduced to the town and to the community in 2012 to serve as a multi-use tool alongside the coyote management strategy. The reporting system continues to be a key part of the coyote education and response procedure today. It provides the residents an opportunity to submit their coyote interactions and view their submissions via the online map. It also provides staff the opportunity to investigate more serious reports of coyote interactions. The Coyote reporting form provides a central reporting form and provides data to better direct the town's efforts. This reporting form is regularly upgraded and remains in effect from 2012. It is a very useful tool for us that our officers use daily. It offers residents the opportunity, as mentioned, to submit the information, and you can include photos relating to various coyote interactions, and sometimes we even receive reports on foxes. While this form does not allow staff to determine the numbers of coyotes, as the same coyote often generates dozens of sighting reports, it does help identify areas of the community where coyotes may be more active, so appropriate signage can be installed to keep residents and their pets safe. The data from this form assists in identifying the response to be taken based on the type of report. As noted in the coyote response strategy, staff will respond accordingly to the report type and may include distribution of flyers, installation of signage, updating to closed garbage systems to detract or deter coyotes from food sources. The response from the town will increase based on the strategy and will include more in-depth investigations relating to den sites or interactions with domestic pets or people. For more information relating to educational materials such as hazing videos, e-learning modules, and seasonal coyote information, please visit our website at oakville.ca. Thank you for your time, and at this time I would like to pass the podium over to Leslie Sampson, our partner from Coyote Watch Canada, who will be providing us with a presentation on the science of coyotes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that introduction. I don't quite see my screen yet. Oh, here we go. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's always great to have an opportunity to reconnect with some of you that we've worked with before in the past and some new folks that might be attending for the first time. And as Margaret and Selena mentioned, if there's any questions that aren't covered, you're able to reach out to the town of Oakville, but you may also reach out to us, especially in respect to our content. Okay, and I will be directing one of our technician specialists to do the slides tonight because I'm virtual off-site, so don't mind my continuous next slide. So you can go to the next slide, thanks. So a little bit about us. We are an all-volunteer organization that works with multi-agencies at various capacities. We are involved in education, research, mitigation, investigative work, and also training first responders from police to animal control and animal services. We have a strong science advisory, and we have a board that works very closely with us. But our most notable aspect is our canine response teams that will be deployed in various different communities that we are partnering with. And so at that collaborative level, oftentimes reports are coming into us, which is then shared with our municipal partners like the town of Oakville, which is a really helpful way of collaborating and helping community members navigate the challenges of living with these highly intelligent canines. Next slide, please. And so the canine response team, we are mobilized, we are ground level response. So oftentimes we could be called into a situation, not just with the town of Oakville. We might do on-site investigations or help homeowners reevaluate their attractant situations. And we use non-lethal mitigation methodologies and conflict resolution, but also, again, building on those collaborative partnerships across Canada. Thank you. Next slide. And so we work within our municipal wildlife strategy framework. We have a 4 cornerstone approach, and we utilize investigation, education, enforcement, and prevention. And we look at coyotes as a consistent ecothermometer. So we do not do active enforcement. That is not our area of expertise, but we will work very closely, for example, with bylaw enforcement. If we're in the field and we recognize there's attractants or issues in a particular area, there's that collaboration and upfront communication. And then, of course, with the education and prevention, we have available resources, print materials, and also research endeavors that we're working on. Thank you. Next slide. And so with coyotes, as Selena had mentioned earlier, there can be a lot of emotion, and sometimes it's hard to navigate that, especially if you've experienced a loss of a family pet. And so what I always hope that folks that are attending, that they kind of clear their mind of preconceived ideas of who these canids are and open up to the possibility. And I think the quote, "The coyote that lives in the wilds of our minds is not the coyote that roams North America. Our misplaced fear, embroidery, indifference, and imaginings is the most perilous presence out there." And so again, try to be open to the information and the science that's available for you as a community. Next slide, please. And so understanding who your wild neighbor is critical, because that gives you that empowerment to make sure that you are wildlife proofing. Maybe the way that you're out in communities with your family dog on the leash. Facts are empowering, and fostering and practicing those healthy, appropriate boundaries between ourselves and wildlife. And it doesn't have to be just coyotes or fox. It can be a wide range of wildlife species that inhabit our communities. And it's really important to learn about those animals and understand their behavior, seasonal milestones, and then maybe actually taking the lead and becoming a champion for wildlife in your community. Next slide, please. And so, as mentioned earlier, social media has such a high influence and a very impactful influence on how we look at these animals. And mainstream outlets rarely conduct those critical investigations. And so oftentimes what we're reading in the media might have, some gaps in facts, and also, getting to the heart of a situation. That investigative journalism often is missing. And there's a promotion of fear and misinformation. And so it's really important. That's why your reports that go through the town, or you come through Coyote Watch Canada, are reporting portals. It's really valuable information. Your community scientists, essentially, because you're providing that important data that can help all of us make informed decisions. And so just be cautious what you're looking at and if it is really fact or fiction. Next slide, please. And so this is a very famous coyote named Patches. And context is everything, because this photo is a snapshot of her yawning, but that photo could actually be used to circulate a very sensational picture of this coyote that could be growling or, some kind of negative behavior. But this kind of photograph garners a lot of attention and amplifies fear and emotion. And you can access any of the literature we have through our website. Next slide, please. And so the ecological and social benefits for canids like coyotes and fox is that they do really contribute to keeping small mammal populations in check, in particular rodents, voles, mice, rats. And it's important because those species are hosts to a plethora of zoonotic diseases, especially for ticks, hosts for ticks. Coyotes are really great at consuming those small rodent populations. And also, for research perspective, they're a great candidate for research focus, ecotourism, there's spiritual kinship, there's beautiful storytelling and artwork that surrounds these particular canids through the cultural connection. And an established family keeps those transient coyotes moving along. Next slide, thank you. And so when we look at canids like coyotes in the community, if there's an injury or they're not feeling well, it could impact their behavior in terms of where they're hunkering down. Oftentimes we'll get reports of coyotes that have sarcoptic mange, and they'll seek out a barn where there's warmth from a manure pile or hay, or under somebody's deck where there's heat that's coming from the structure. And so when we get reports about those animals that are injured or not feeling well, we oftentimes will deploy or work alongside, the Humane Society, but we're also doing our own outreach and rescues aside from this particular location. And so when you look at those cat colonies, the food resources that are available, all wildlife looks for energy easy food, and coyotes are fabulous at finding out those easy food sources. So food outdoors is a big no-no in those open compost piles. And if there is a death in the family, especially, we're going into pup season now, and I'll get more into that in a bit. So both parents are raising those young, and so it's critical to have both parents in the environment to help raise the family. And so if it's a single parent, there's going to be an increase in food demands by that single parent. And so when there's social structure that's disrupted through early mortality, it can compromise the stability of the family and also may cause a family to be forced to disperse too early. Next slide, thank you. And so when we look at conflicts in communities, the town of Oakville has an absolutely stellar coyote response strategy. All of these items that are listed here, the enforcement of existing bylaws, the feeding connections, looking at hot spots in the community, a park or a cemetery or a trail system, all of those are part of the investigation process through the road officers for the town of Oakville. And so when you do those reports, it's really important. If you do witness feeding taking place, and it could be a non-target species for squirrels or birds, it's important that you share that information with the town, because then there can be steps made to mitigate those situations. Next slide, please. And so looking at the coexistence ingredients, there's already feeding wildlife bylaw in place. There's many partners to the table: Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, seasonal wildlife education awareness, which is why the town is having the meeting, non-lethal solutions, and fostering those appropriate human boundaries with wildlife. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about coyote vocalizations, that can really stir up some really exciting emotions, or folks get really scared about that high-pitched sound. These are canid oral cues, and oftentimes folks believe, it's a myth that has been circulated for many, many years, that when coyotes are vocalizing, they're killing something. If you really think about it, it doesn't make sense. And I can't sing opera with my mouth full, and neither can they. They're not going to advertise when they're consuming something. They're very efficient at hunting. And so all of their communication modes, they're either defending territory, they're communicating with one another. It might be one that's dispersed away from the family, trying to find a new partner. But all those barks and yips and howls, or warnings to family of danger, especially if the dog is off leash, you might hear a coyote or two vocalizing and warning one another about that dog being off leash. And also, oftentimes when you're listening to those vocalizations, always folks are assuming that there's more than there really are. And that is called the bow jest effect. And so two can sound like a chorus. And just remember, they're communicating, and their vocalizations can travel a great distance, depending on the time of year and the weather. Next slide, please. And so again, just quickly reiterating the importance of those mapping systems, and Oakville has that in place. But the most important thing there is that if you do see feeding, you're reporting that, so the town can respond appropriately. But also remember that when you look at that visual that mapping, that in the same area, you're looking at the individuals that are residing in that territory. So the odd one might be a transitory coyote passing through, but for the most part, in one location, you're going to see the same coyote individuals multiple times in a day. And so it doesn't mean that that is the actual number of coyotes. Next slide, please. And so looking at the scientific classification, and I urge you, please do, head to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. There's been some absolutely amazing research done on the eastern coyote. This is available for you to see on our website also. But the most important thing here is understanding that we have one species here in Ontario, the eastern coyote, which is sometimes referred to as the coy wolf. We do not have two different species of Canis latrans living here in Ontario. And our eastern coyote actually has a genetic contribution from the western coyote and also the Algonquin wolf. And depending on where the sample sets are taken, old dog DNA. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the genetic makeup is of these animals when it comes to coexisting. It is a community effort, and understanding who they are and that you're seeing the same eastern coyotes that have been here for over 100 years. And remember, the takeaway message is that coyotes, fox, wolves, jackal, all come from the same canid family as our dog, as our beautiful family dogs. Next slide, please. And so this is a great visual, and actually I'll thank one of our community partners here for this, because it just really gives you a great reference point to see about the size. And coyotes are always, they are overestimated in terms of their size. The average is 38 pounds, up to 18 and a half, 20. You might get the odd one, but they actually look larger than they really are. They're long and lean, and with their full coat in the winter, they can look pretty big. Next slide, please. And so one thing to consider is that coyotes do mate for life when left to thrive. And so they will maintain a territory, a home range, until the point is maybe they're forced to disperse. So they are mates for life, which is an incredible characteristic to have with a mammal. Next slide, please. And so right now, as I mentioned, we're coming into the pup season. By the end of April, the eastern coyote pups will be born. We're getting reports about fox kits that are already coming outside of the den. Within that first year, female coyote could have her litter, but we find that the data is showing that it's usually greater than about 3 years of age. And so between 60 and 63 days is a gestation period, similar to a domestic dog. And their choices of dens, some females can be very particular in where they do make their dens. Others will use the same dens year after year as long as they're clean and they're safe and there's not a lot of human disturbance. The coyotes are active all year round. And yes, even during the day, it doesn't mean they're sick. But if you start seeing trends and sightings of a coyote visiting a yard or going to an area over and over, that's the kind of report that the town needs to receive, because then investigation can be done about the food. And in a stable territory, the average is about five pups. Next slide, please. And so the pups in the den, if you look at the lower photo, when coyote pups are born, they are born blind and their ears are down. And so they are completely vulnerable and reliant on mom and dad to protect them. They're completely reliant on mom's milk. And the photo above, that's about after 2 weeks. Their ears aren't quite up yet, but they are more active, and they'll be coming out of the den around between 2.5 to 3 weeks, and they start exploring outside and beyond the den. And so those pups are vulnerable, and they need their mother to survive. They're weaned about 5 to 6 weeks, and once they're going on to semi-solid foods, mom and dad are regurgitating that food for them, and so the pups stimulate that regurgitation response, and it helps them digest the food. Like our kids that go on our baby food first and then they go on to solid, it's the same thing. Thank you. Next slide. And so once they leave the den, they will remain at a rendezvous site. So this is where folks might believe that coyote pups have been orphaned. Coyote parents are devoted. Unless both parents have been killed, one of those parents, once they've left the den and they're remaining at a rendezvous site, one of the parents will be able to provide for this family. And so it's really important that you do not remove coyote pups or fox kits from the outdoors. If you believe that there might be an issue, please do reach out to us. We can put up trail cams or monitor to see if an adult is actually around. And with coyote families, oftentimes they have an older sibling from a year or two before, aunt and uncle, and they actually come back and help raise those pups with their mom and dad. And so please do reach out if you believe that there's an issue. Next slide, please. And so their diet, they are absolutely excellent foraging and hunting experts. They're typically, you're going to see them mousing just like you do a fox. Their diet is very diverse. They're adaptive omnivores, even though they're classified as carnivores. And their wide range of diet choices depends on the season, the availability of food, and also when there's human food being provided, that can actually really impact their natural foraging and hunting behavior. And they'll just keep going back to the same location and over and over. And that's why it's so important that we do not provide human food resources for fox or coyotes or any other wildlife. And so 60 to 80% of their diet can involve those rodents, but they do eat snails and insects and dead animals too. And they are considered a keystone facilitator for healthy ecosystems. And they are so clever and very well versed at what's in their territory. So food introduction by people into coyote family territories. Please.
Sorry, it sounds like we're losing Leslie a little bit. So I think it was next slide, and then we'll see how your connection is now, Leslie, and if it we'll see whether or not it improves. So go ahead.
Is this okay? Is this better? Hands up. Yes, I hope so. Sorry, folks. My internet is a bit sketchy. So this is a great slide that demonstrates the percentage of dietary choices for Western, which was done by Dr. Alexander and Lukasek, and will be available on the recording after if you'd like to get more into the dietary data that's provided in this research. But if you do look, the significant amount of food is really small mammals and vegetation. Next slide, please. And also they are fabulous at cleaning up dead animals. So oftentimes, even if there's a cat that's been hit on the road, you might see a coyote or fox carrying that animal away. This particular instance, deer was hit by a train, and this is coyote was actually up. It took about 3 days for the family to make good use of that deer that was killed on the train. Next slide, please. And so remember, in our communities, when there's infrastructure change, it's not only impacting us and how we're able to drive and get through the community, but it also impacts them. So new subdivisions, fencing, culverts that are put in, coyotes are just brilliant at navigating safely in communities that are highly populated. And they will use different railway beds, hydro corridors, shorelines, culverts, old roadways, and also use the same pathways that you and I would use when we're going out into the community. Those skill sets are passed on to their young. And in cities like Chicago, with their very healthy coyote population, they're very, very skilled at navigating throughout, their territory. Next slide, please. And so, again, just to appreciate when you're looking at where coyotes are eking out a living, they can utilize the very small green space and spend the significant amount of time there. It's really important that they are able to eke out a living. They need food, shelter, and water. If there is not those three needs met in a territory, that means that they will have to move out and disperse into another area. And that's why it's so important not to provide those food incentives for coyotes, not to naturally be leaving an area that doesn't have enough food to sustain them. Next slide, please. And so getting into the harmful handouts, we see this all the time. And the photograph above, you can see that people are deliberately providing food sources for coyotes. Right now, we're having a lot of cases, not just for the town of Oakville, but also for our other partners. A lot of feeding going on with not only coyotes, but fox and other wildlife. And what happens when we provide those unnatural food sources? First of all, nutritionally, it's really poor for these animals. It can create not natural foraging and hunting behavior, and it can create a situation where they might have that expectation from humans for that food reward because they are food conditioned. And so we don't want that. If you know of those cases, please, again, do report them. Next slide, please. And so when we look at hotspot investigations, we're looking at a wide range of things from barbecue cleanup to fencing with holes, also pruning going over a fence, creating a bridge-like build-up on the other side, which would then allow coyotes and other animals to climb up over top of a fence. And so it's really important that you pick up your dog feces, especially when you're out in green spaces, because that feces attracts rodents, which is food source for coyotes. Next slide, please. And so right now is the time of year where you need to be considering sealing up under your outbuildings. If you have a situation where you believe that fox have made a den or a coyote has been coming around, it's really, really important that you reach out to professionals to address that situation, and also those outbuildings at golf courses and cemeteries need to be maintained so they're not attractive den sites for canids like coyotes and fox. And these locations often are hotspots where photographers start to bait coyotes. So if you do see that behavior, it's important to report that. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of a coyote that was coming through. Next slide, please. Coming through a residential area. And there was food incentives there. Just one. Next slide, please. Yeah, there was just one household that was providing food. And that coyote was passing by countless backyards. And until the investigation was conducted and the feeding stopped, this coyote was visiting on a regular basis. But that goes to show how that outreach and that mitigation can work to change coyote behavior. Next slide, please. And so just remembering that our canids, our wildlife are so well equipped and capable of providing for their families. Next slide, please. And so remembering that if your little dog is out the back or a cat is free roaming, fencing doesn't necessarily keep out wildlife, and especially birds of prey. Here is an example of a fox that's very capable of climbing up and over a fence, and so could a coyote. But also very small cats and dog breeds can also become at risk when they're left out in the backyard. So remember that the fence is not going to keep out all wildlife all the time. Next slide, please. And so we're going to go through a little bit of aversion conditioning. What it is, it's a methodology that actually discourages a wildlife like coyote or fox from coming close. There's very direct actions that can be taken using tools, and it's a non-lethal community effort, but it also empowers residents to send a very strong, assertive message to a coyote that they're not welcome. It's not a good response if people are allowing a coyote or fox to bed down in their backyard. That kind of behavior needs to be reported, so there can be intervention by way of aversion conditioning. And the messaging has to be clear from every person in that particular area where a coyote or fox is visiting. Next slide, please. And some of the tools that you can use, I'll go into in the next slide, but once wildlife has become food conditioned, it's really important that the food attractants are removed and aversion conditioning is deployed. And that's where the town officers, the road officers, and also Coyote Watch Canada can assist in those situations. Next slide, please. And some of the methods, bringing an umbrella and popping that, usually it's enough to have your voice loud and assertive, waving your arms, clapping. Sometimes whistles can work, but in areas where it's close to, maybe they would be hearing at playgrounds or fields, sports fields, a whistle might not be appropriate. So we will do help assess a location and go through the appropriate and different tools that could be used. Also filling a green garbage bag with air and snapping it, using voice, and making sure that you can carry a shake can filled with coins that you can throw towards but not at the coyote. And also in the seasonal option is a water hose in the summertime. But it's really important, again, to remove those attractants. And aversion conditioning and hazing methods are part of an overall coexistence program. Next slide, please. And so you're not going to use hazing or aversion conditioning when there's a mom with pups or near a den, or if an animal, a coyote or a fox is injured, or it's during mating season. You're going to make sure that you understand who and what is in your area. And if you are seeing regular sightings or you're noticing that people are feeding, that will also escalate a situation and encourage a coyote to hang around way beyond their welcome. Next slide, please. And so the last couple of slides will address people, dogs, and coyotes. It's difficult for folks to appreciate and realize that other dogs are actually like another predator to a coyote. And so they're pretty good at living, avoiding and living in a coexisting manner with domestic dogs. But there can be escalated situations where dogs are off leash, or there's a little dog left in the back, and there could be food incentives somewhere near it, another home. And so it's important to understand when you're out, especially in the spring and early summer, pups are going to be out in the area. Kits, as I mentioned, are already out now, fox kits. And so your dog could not only harm a coyote, but it also could, in this photo above, chasing a coyote, and eventually that coyote might turn around and retaliate with a bite to the rump area, or actually run back to their family. And so often you'll see, if your dog is on a leash, a coyote might be watching you and maybe shadowing you or escorting you out of an area, especially at the end of April early May, end of May, that means that pups could be in the area. So look at the seasonal milestones that these animals might be going through to help you understand. And please put your earbuds away and don't be on your cell phones, because there's a lot of different dangers that are out there besides a coyote that might be nearby. Next slide, please. And so if you happen to hear, I had mentioned earlier, spoke a little bit about those coyote vocalizations. Many folks, we get reports about a coyote that started howling or barking when they were walking their dog in a park area, or the coyote started jumping up and down or arching his or her back. And those are all modes of communication. That coyote is concerned about the dog, not about the person. And so they're trying to send a message. And sometimes the message is clear and other times it's not so clear. But if a coyote starts to howl or starts barking and that jumping up and down or arching the back or bluff charging, the likelihood that pups are around is pretty high. And so it's important that your dog is on a leash. And you can also, this is one of those instances where it's important that you report that behavior to the town of Oakville so they're aware. And also, if you are being escorted out of an area, it's really important that you never turn your back and run from any canid, whether it's a domestic dog, a fox, or coyote. It's very important that you use a firm, very strong, assertive voice. Keep your dog close to you. If your dog is small enough and you're able to, pick that dog up. And the same with a small child. If you were walking with a small child, you would do the same. But it's very important that you remain calm, keep your dog on a leash, and don't use those extend leashes, because they can go into underbush area and there could be young pups in that area. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to say thank you for listening in tonight, and hopefully we can get to a lot of your questions. There's our contact information. And we really appreciate you attending tonight. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Leslie, for that presentation. I don't think we can emphasize enough the importance of not feeding wildlife. So we're going to move on now to our Q&A portion of tonight. I'm going to start us off with one question. Well, Brett sort of reviews all the questions that have come in and compiles those. So the first question we have for tonight are coyotes and fox dangerous? So Leslie, I'm going to put this question to you, please, if you can provide our first response.
I think right out of the chute, we have to appreciate and understand and respect that coyotes and fox are wild animals. They live by their own script. Again, food really can impact and influence their proximity tolerance to us. And so whether it's for an adult that is weighing in tonight, or you have grandchildren or kids of your own, it's important that you have those conversations with your kids, with each other, with your neighbors. We don't want people approaching wildlife, admire them from afar, and definitely don't encourage them to hang around your property. But the old adage is this: if you have education and you can make informed, well-balanced decisions, we're minimizing those risks. And I always, look at how communities are coexisting, and they're doing that because they're practicing the good strategies, the good wildlife proofing tips for their home, and they're also listening to the facts about these animals and not that sensational information that can be floating around.
Education is power.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll actually put us over to Brett for a moment. I think he has some questions from the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a few questions in here. So the first question is the town of Oakville aware that leash dogs have been attacked?
Okay, so this first question I'll actually put to Margaret Boswell, if she's able to respond on any items that may have come in through our coyote reporting.
So to confirm, the question was, are we aware of the number of attacks on dogs?
Yes, and specifically leash dogs.
Okay. The town of Oakville does, as mentioned in my presentation, through the reporting form and also through residents calling in, we do investigate reports of dogs that might have experienced an injury or potentially even passed away due to an altercation or incident with a coyote. Having said that, over the last couple years, I can report that we have received, I believe last year, 2 reports, but they were more of dogs roaming free. They weren't of dogs being leashed. And then this year, 1. Apart from that, I have not received any complaints or reports of dogs having any altercations while being on a leash. That being said, they may have occurred. We just haven't received the reports.
Thanks, Margaret. And I think this goes right back to the importance of making sure that we're sharing this information. We're using the Coyote reporting form, and that way we have all the information and can compile the results, set trends, and make sure that we're looking at those neighborhoods like Leslie has described in her presentation. Fantastic. So, Brett, if we can have the next question.
So signage was mentioned, and they may get to this in the presentation. Well, the presentation's over. So I know that there's a pack close to Morrison Valley Trail, as I hear them regularly. However, I have never seen signage on the trails. Is there a plan to put them in place?
Wonderful. So I know there are signs at many of the trails, and we can certainly look at Morrison Valley and evaluate the signage there. So we'll work with certainly our officers and evaluate what's out there and works with our Parks Department to ensure there's adequate signage there. So thank you for that report, and I'll put this to Margaret, and I think she has something to add.
Just to add to that, is if you would call into our office, specifically it would be helpful for us to know if you could call into our office to provide us with the specific details on where on the trail that you may see a void in the signage, and then as Selena mentioned, then we can then proceed and work with our partners in parks to have those signs posted.
Excellent. So thank you for that comment, and we'll make sure we look into that.
So next question comes, it's not specifically about Oakville. It says coyote attacks on humans are escalating in Stanley Park. So I'm assuming Vancouver. They had to euthanize 2 coyotes. Is it our position that that's what we would do with attacks on humans?
So I think this goes back to our protocol, and I'll look to Margaret to provide a response as far as what that escalating procedure is, should there be a bite on a human in Oakville. And I think it's important to note that that's only happened once to my knowledge, and it was really as a result of a situation where there was feeding involved. And again, it goes back to why we really shouldn't be feeding people or feeding wildlife at all, because it really does invite this type of situation. So did you want to add to that, Margaret?
Yes, as mentioned, it is our response would be outlined and is available online for your review on our website under the Coyote response strategy. But basically what would happen in that instance is we would ask that members of the public report the incident to our office and or to Coyote Watch Canada. We would work in partnership then to investigate the concerns. At that point then we would move forward with the best possible resolution. We always would look for feeding concerns, garbage. It feeds back into how we would respond to a majority of our cases. We would try to mitigate any issues, but it's difficult to comment on the end result. It would really be dependent on how serious the nature of the report would be.
Wonderful. Thanks, Margaret. And I think Jim Barry, our Director of Municipal Enforcement Services, was going to add to that as well.
Thank you, Selena. And I think, I don't think we'd be in a position ever to judge what another locale's done or why they made the decisions they've made. But the one thing that this question did lead me to think about is, and Leslie, I'm going to point towards you, is what happens when stable coyote families are removed from a neighborhood for whatever reason that may be. I found that interesting when I heard you speak about that before.
Yeah, so when you look at wildlife populations, in particular canids, they rely heavily on their home range or their established territory. And it used to be the assumption that all coyote families, once the pups are of an age where they might disperse within that first year, we know now through the data and field observations that coyote families disperse. There's a lot of factors involved. It could be loss of habitat. It could be just that the family, parents are kicking them out earlier, or if there is a viable, healthy food source, they might remain longer. That is another reason why it's so important not to provide that false food source, because that means that coyotes that should be dispersing are going to maybe remain a little bit longer. But in that landscape, once a coyote family is removed, whether they've dispersed out of a territory or they're lethally removed, eventually through scent trails and there's these wonderful natural corridors, other canids that are mobile that are dispersing, which could be any time of the year, will come in and fill that void. And if we don't address the community issues that might be there, one feeder, like I showed you in the slide, one backyard, providing food, and this coyote's coming back and forth, and folks have little dogs in the backyard. So that's why it's so important that we keep these families stable. They can maintain and keep out those transient other coyotes that might be dispersing through, but also not providing that food reward for them to remain in an area that might no longer be viable.
Excellent. Thank you, Leslie.
Did I answer your question?
I think so.
I hope so.
Reiterated the importance of keeping wildlife wild. So I'll look to Brett for the next question.
So Leslie mentioned being shadowed, and this person wants to know, what if the area you're being shadowed by a coyote is your own neighborhood and yard?
Oh, okay. So if it's in your yard, then hopefully you would be deploying one of those strategies outlined, whether it's the, warmer months, you can use that hose to disperse. If a coyote is regularly coming to your property, whether it's the front yard or the back, that's really important to reach out, because an investigation would be done. But we would ask first and foremost that you look at what potential attractants, and they might not be deliberate. It could be an unknown attractant. It could be overflowing birdseed that's on the ground underneath that bird feeder. And the bird feeder is a magnet for a plethora of wildlife species. Once that seed's on the ground, you've got rats, mice, all sorts of squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, even deer will eat birdseed. And then coyotes and fox and even birds of prey are going to come and utilize those food sources, those small mammals. And so on your property, definitely do not, turn and run away. You need to use those methods that were outlined, and please do send us an email if that isn't if that's just a general question, or this is something that's actually happening on your property. And then in the neighborhood, we would need to know where that neighborhood is and work very closely with the town of Oakville to investigate that. If you're walking your dog, it's usually, if you're being shadowed and you don't have a dog, that also must be reported, because that's an indication that coyote is demanding, there's a food demand there. And then we would have to investigate if there is direct feeding going on by somebody.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Leslie. And I think it is so important for everybody to remember that you're right. It's not about deliberate feeding necessarily all the time. It absolutely can be indirect, whether it be through bird feeders or even through fruit trees, where you have
Yes.
the fruit fall on the ground and it's not picked up. So absolutely, all those things need to be looked at. So, Brett, do we have another question?
So that's a great segue to our next question. How do I report to town officials about neighbors who have bird and squirrel feeders or sources of food?
Excellent. Well, I think I can answer this one. So for any time you have a lot maintenance concern, and that's what that would be, especially if it's attracting rats or any other pests, just give Service Oakville a call at 905-845-6601 at our town main line, and you can report that for investigation by Municipal Enforcement Services. Or you can email that concern in to service@oakville.ca as well.
The next question is about the sighting map on oakville.ca. So they just want to clarify that there could be one pair of coyotes reported a number of times, not 20. So there's not really a question in there. I think it's just more clarification how one person could see the same coyote 20 times and report it in 20 different locations in that area.
Sure, and maybe this is something that Leslie can provide a little bit of, shed some light on for us.
What a great question. And actually, all the questions from the attendees have been fabulous. So what happens in a home range is that there might be a mated pair, or it could be a single coyote at that point. And so once that coyote starts navigating through their territory, and depending on the food resources, we know through the research, our research plus the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, there's some compelling evidence that a coyote, that family that has abundance of food source, might have a smaller territory, 5 kilometers squared, or it could be 15 kilometers squared. So all the folks in between that area, if they're reporting a coyote sighting, they're going to be reporting the same one. That's why we really welcome photographs or videos, because then we can start cataloging and identifying those individual coyotes, because not every coyote looks the same. And so their morphology, basically like you and I, we look different, and that's how we would identify and get an idea about who is actually living and utilizing that space in the community.
Perfect, thank you, Leslie.
So next question is, we live on 16 Mile Creek Ravine and watch many walkers with their dogs off leash. Lately, almost 50% of pet dogs are walking with owners off leash. What practical and timely measures can we take if we see this dangerous behavior?
Excellent. So, Jim, it's been a little while since we heard from you. Did you want to take this question as far as reporting?
Sorry, Selena, you kind of cut out there as you said it, so I'm going to assume you pointed at me. So
I did, yes.
Absolutely. So I think you said it before, and we do have staff on every day, all day, and certainly residents are more than welcome to call the Town of Oakville number 905-845-6601 and make that complaint, or email in at service@oakville.ca. And staff will be able to come out. The more people we hear from, we can make sure to make sure our resources are available in those areas to try and curb that activity, because we know it does lead to negative things like coyotes where they shouldn't be.
Absolutely.
Jim, Selena, can I elaborate on that point? That great question. I think the other takeaway message here is that if dogs are off leash in the same area chronically on a daily basis, that's also putting pressure on the wildlife populations, including resident coyotes or fox, deer. So they're using energy that they don't have, running away from dogs off leash or defending themselves. And there can be escalated incidents, when there is a history of one dog to coyote. And so these behaviors of dogs off leash are really the first step of what could create an escalation in negative encounters or conflict between a dog and a coyote.
Yeah, absolutely, Leslie. I think that's definitely important. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think further to both of those is is that really dogs off leash on our parks in our parks and trails present a number of problems, not only with coyotes, but also conflict with people. And it's important for everyone to remember that it is a requirement for all dogs to be leashed on park property. And we do work with our partners at the Oakville Milton District Humane Society and they provide assistance and enforcement with that as well. So certainly it's a group effort. And like Jim said, anytime you see that, please feel free to contact us and we'll make sure there's patrols in those neighborhoods. But we've noticed it was Morrison Trail there, so we've taken note of that and we'll make sure that we have some enforcement patrols there. So thank you for that comment and question.
Next question is, what do you do if a coyote is charging at you and your dog?
Okay, so Leslie, we'll ask you to provide a response for this one.
Okay, so I wish I could actually speak to the person that asked the question because it's a great question. There's incidentals and details that I would like to be able to ask, but if the dog is on leash or off leash, that's important to know because my response would be different for the dog off leash to the dog that's on leash. But if I will, I'll make the assumption that the dog is on leash. And when you say charging towards, oftentimes it's a bluff charge. If you're walking in an area that you know is habitat or home range for coyotes, bring that green garbage bag. Make sure you practice a little bit at home where it's safe with your dog. You can use that green garbage bag. You can use the umbrella. If your dog is tight close to you and you're using that firm voice, coyotes are focused on the dog. So you have to get the attention away from your dog. And again, as I mentioned, going back to the previous question, if there's a history with your dog that chased a coyote, that coyote is not going to forget that. And there could be an invigorated sensitivity to your dog. But that's also another situation where you should report and we can help even go out and walk with you in that area where an incident has occurred. And so you pull your dog close to you, you slowly back away. If it is during pup rearing time at the end of April, early May, end of May, think about the fact that there could be pups nearby. The best thing is for you to slowly back away, make sure you're using your voice, use that bag, snap it, throw your cans with coins, know your surroundings. So if for all the residents that are in attendance tonight, if you know that coyotes have been seen in your area, you should always have some kind of aversion conditioning tool on hand to help you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Leslie. And we'll ask Jim to add to that.
Well, I was interested, Leslie. You piqued my interest. So I thought, what if that dog was off leash at the time?
Yeah. So unfortunately, most dogs, and mine included, that's why he's always on a leash. His recall, especially if he's chasing something, and it's a natural instinct for our dogs. They're part of that canid family. Their DNA is to chase, chase, chase. That's who they are. We can't get that out of them, even though they're domesticated. So if your dog is off leash and your dog's pursuing the coyote, hopefully at some point the dog stops and comes back, or you might have that coyote chasing that dog back towards you. It's really, really important. Like if two domestic dogs were fighting together, you're not going to intervene there on your own. But if your dog comes back to you, again, get the leash on or grab the collar, because sometimes a collar could slip off or a leash, might be pulled out of your hand. You grab that, pull them close together, use your voice, use your body, and if you have to, you fight back. But keeping in mind, if your dog doesn't have 100% recall, and it's not an off-leash designated area, you really should keep your dogs on leash for your protection, the dog's protection, but also for the wildlife protection.
So I think that just goes to, the two scenarios to me. There's much greater chance that the one scenario, the off-leash scenario, is going to wind up in a negative situation. And I think that just highlights the fact of why we have to keep our dogs, as much as we'd like not to, why we have to keep our dogs on leash when we're in these areas. And we've heard tonight already, Morrison Creek and others, where we're seeing so much dog off leash. And we appreciate that information, but it's so important that people do keep their dogs on leash.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses and that great question. So Brett, we'll look to you for the next question.
So how can you tell, or how do you know if a coyote is feeling unwell? When I see one pass through my front lawn and my backyard, I'm scared and I can't tell if they're feeling unwell.
Great question. Well, is that for me or maybe
Yeah,
Eva?
Leslie.
Maybe I'll
Sounds
bring
like a
Eva
good
into
one
this
for
at
you.
some point. But if coyote or a fox is curled up in a ball in your backyard and that animal has been there over a period of time or coming back to the same area and you know for sure you're not providing food, then that is that to me would be an indication that, oh, we better investigate this situation a little bit further. Coyotes are naturally navigating through communities. They're going to be going down streets. They're going to be going across a yard. But if this is a regular occurrence, I would bank on a food reward being provided. And so if a coyote has missing hair, oftentimes it could be sarcoptic mange. They are susceptible to a lot of different diseases and also injury. They get injured by domestic dogs, large domestic dogs, and so they might have an injury. They might be missing a paw from a trapping injury. All of those things can be reported. If you can get a photograph or a video, if a coyote isn't moving or they look like they're a little bit hesitant when they're moving, all of that information through a photo or video would be very helpful for the town of Oakville, for their response staff, but also us. And then we can do those outreach rescues where they can get medical assistance at a rehabber.
Perfect. Thank you, Leslie. And I think it is absolutely important to note that those videos and photos can be attached to your coyote reporting.
So next question, I think the people have been thinking our response is just for one coyote, but what happens if you get a counter with a pack of coyotes, so multiple coyotes coming at you?
So Leslie, if hopefully you can shed some light on this one for us.
So again, if you're walking in an area, first of all, I would hope you're not wearing earbuds, you don't have your cell phone in your hand. You need to be aware, again, if you have a history of your dog chasing coyotes, that family is going to remember that, and there could be an escalation. They could be approaching you, but it's really important to keep your dog close to you. Use all your same cues. Our aversion conditioning, we deploy those same methods on numerous coyotes. It's not just a single coyote. If you know that there is a family in the area, let's say, for example, 2 adults and a younger pup, a yearling from last year, and they're coming out and, shadowing you, you need to report that. But again, carry one of your aversion conditioning, your hazing tools, and make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. And if you are walking and notice any kind of food on the pathway, your dog will be considered competition for that food by coyote families, and that's why a lot of altercations do happen too. With the dog on the leash, it minimizes, it pulls that dog close to you, and the coyotes aren't interested in you unless you've been an individual that's provided food for that family.
Excellent. Thank you, Leslie. Brett, do we have another question?
So this one is there a threshold of the density of the coyote population that will require removal or culling for the town of Oakville?
So Leslie, are you able to provide any information on culling and the effectiveness of that and when or if that would ever be appropriate?
I think I'd probably hand it off to my colleague there, Eva. And if there's anything I can weigh in on afterwards, that's fine. But
Excellent. So
thanks,
great
Eva.
timing, Eva.
Thanks, Leslie.
So
Hi.
did you want us
So
to repeat that
home,
question, or
Sorry?
did you want us to repeat the question? Yeah.
No, so calls in general are not an option for coyotes. Historically, calls have proven to be ineffective in any jurisdiction that they've been undertaken in, and actually have the opposite effect or result, meaning you end up with more coyotes. Coyotes have adapted to human persecution very well, and they can respond by producing larger litters. They can start breeding at a younger age. So, and what happens to your prey populations when you take predators out? Well, your populations increase. And thinking about the ability, coyotes have that ability to adjust their litter size based on food abundance. So, and their territory size is related to prey densities. So you take out the predators, your prey populations explode, and add to that human-provided food sources. Those coyotes are going to require a smaller sized territory to defend, which will result, obviously, in more animals.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Eva. I know the ministry puts a great deal of time and effort into their research, so thank you for that. Brett, do we have another question?
So is the use of residential bird feeders to be discouraged then? We've talked a lot about it's a food source, but is it discouraged for you to put up a bird feeder at your home?
Fantastic question, actually. So I will ask Margaret Boswell to respond to this question.
I think if used responsibly, that you can continue to use a bird feeder. The difficulty, though, and where we find that we are called to investigate is the feed doesn't always just specifically stay in the feeder. And so maybe a hummingbird feeder might, as an example, be a safer type of bird feeder, but it's really up to the responsibility of the homeowner, if they do choose to have a bird feeder, to ensure that they maintain the ground underneath to clean up any feed that might fall onto the ground, because it's not only birds that are going to eat that food, it's squirrels that climb up the pole, it's any type of animal that can climb up and access that food, and that's where that bird feed is falling onto the ground and then attracting other types of animals such as rats and then subsequently potentially coyotes. Selena, I don't know if you have anything to add?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, and I'll look to our officers and their experience, and maybe Marnie, you're able to sort of provide, in your experience, have you seen sort of bird feeders that have that catch underneath that catches the feed so it doesn't hit the ground, or any suggestions you have just to mitigate that sort of situation?
Yeah, any kind of bird feeder that does have the proper base to it that holds the seed in it, as opposed to letting it just fall on the ground, is always recommended. Makes it easier because you do get the squirrels, the chippies. I mean, I have several feeders in my own yard, but I do have the ones that have the base, so there's not a lot of that overflow. I know a lot of people make suet and put that out and leave it all along their fences. That's not a good idea because that's made with bacon grease and whatnot. So any more contained bird feeders, it's not that you can't have them, they just have to be as contained as possible. If they're not, then you do need to start cleaning up under the feeders to ensure that there's not a lot sitting around on the ground to attract more critters to your property.
Excellent. Thanks, Marnie. Yeah, I think we can agree that the critters will definitely attract the coyotes, and I think most people would be surprised at how quickly they can come to any seed that's laying on the ground.
Selena, if I can just add
Absolutely.
to Marnie's great answer. If, though, a coyote is frequenting your backyard and you have the bird feeder up, that the bird feeder comes down until aversion conditioning or hazing methods are deployed, and that coyote learns quickly that they're not welcome in that backyard. So the birder would have to come down in that instance and then ensuring. But If it's not the bird feeder that's attracting the coyote to the backyard, then you have to figure out, is it the fruit trees or is it something else? Maybe you have an overabundance of rodents in the back or something like that.
That's an excellent point, Leslie, and I think that's definitely where our officers' expertise comes in to help investigate those food sources. Terrific. Thanks, Brett. Next question.
So there's a few in here about attack on humans. So they're citing a couple cases throughout BC and Nova Scotia and the United States. So I think it might be important to maybe reiterate if an attack on a human is likely and, you know.
Certainly, yeah, and I think this is obviously one of the major concerns that people have is risk to themselves, risk to their children. What does that mean, and what will we do? And I think I'll look to probably a number of our panelists here to really sort of address this question. And maybe Eva, you could start us off with some of the perspective from the ministry, and then Leslie, and then maybe Jim can wrap it up.
So, okay, so these animals, they are predators, so they should be treated as potentially dangerous. But I have to say that public fear of these animals generally does exceed the actual risk of conflict or harm. The risk of attack from a coyote on a human is very low relative to other common hazards in most of North America. So that includes being attacked by domestic dogs, motor vehicle accidents, and even shootings. So it's just important to, like I said, stick to your best practices, avoid attracting coyotes, don't try to tame them. Again, all the same stuff that Leslie has mentioned. Don't feed, don't tame, and avoid.
Excellent. Thanks, Eva. We'll try and keep those wildlife wild, and hopefully they'll stay away and be more afraid of us than we are of them. Leslie, did you want to add to Eva's answer?
Yeah, I mean, Eva covered everything pretty much, but I mean, I understand why folks would want to delve down that road in terms of looking at other communities that have a higher incident of coyote bites to people. But again, reiterating what Jim had said earlier, there's information that isn't public about different locations, different communities. And one thing is clear, the research shows that when there is a coexistence program in place in a community, it's a lot less likely those incidents will get to that point where a coyote's understanding of their boundaries is really at risk. So I think it's important for folks to look at, yes, again, they're wild animals, but what we do and how we interact and how we don't interact is going to impact the likelihood of having a negative encounter. And it doesn't mean that you stick your hand in between a coyote and your dog that are engaged in physical contact. You can't do that, because the likelihood of you doing that, you will probably be bitten either by your dog by accident or by the coyote by accident.
Terrific. Thank you, Leslie. Jim, did you want to add to that? And I think Margaret has the procedure here as well, if we want to reference that.
No, that's perfect, and I'm sure Margaret will have more information than I, and the two answers ahead of me were excellent. I think I would just say that everybody's actions add to the safety of everybody. So as long as we are properly coexisting, making sure we don't have dogs off leash or those food sources, I think that the threat from these animals is pretty low. We're very lucky in Oakville. We do have a great procedure in place and resources in place to respond to these issues. So I'm certainly proud of that. And I think the numbers that we see where there's actually those negative interactions with people are very low. And I think, Selena, you said at the beginning, there's one time that you can think of in the recent history that we've had to even consider that. So I think that all goes to show that we are working together on this program and are having success. And and it's certainly a positive thing.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. I certainly agree with that statement, and we'll look to Margaret to give us the details on the procedure.
I did want to, the procedure does speak to obviously what our role and what actions we would take given the type of call. But I did really want to conclude the discussion more so on some statistics that we have from the region of Halton, and just to support how safe our community is and the low level of risk in our community for a person to actually encounter a bite from a coyote. So in 2018, there were 2 reports in Halton region, one being in Oakville, but the report was likely the bite was likely not as a result of a coyote, but rather a fox. So just highlighting again that, it's not just coyotes we need to really be aware of in our surroundings. We also have to be aware of foxes and other wildlife and respond appropriately. In 2019 and 2020, Oakville has had no reports of any bites to humans from coyotes, and so that's good news. Overall, in the region in 2019 and 2020, there were 2 in total in 2019 and 2023. So I just really wanted to highlight that because I think it's important for our community to understand how safe and successful our program is, because really it is a partnership. It's a partnership in coexistence with wildlife and with the community respecting the wildlife, in the town providing the assistance through education and outreach and investigations. And so I think as we move forward and we continue with the program, we will look to reinforce the program, to provide some updates where needed, rely on our partners for any sort of scientific updates that we can incorporate into our literature for our residents. And I think really that will help us move forward with the coexistence program.
Excellent. Thank you, Margaret. And certainly our protocol is available online, so please feel free to have a look. It really does outline what the response is for different things, whether it be sightings or interactions and that sort of thing. So please feel free to have a look at that and understand really what our response program is, because it is really quite a full program, especially when we look at our municipal partners in other areas. So please feel free to have a look there and contact us with any questions. Brett, do we have any more questions?
There's one more in here. Are coyotes interested in vegetable gardens? So we talked about seeds and stuff, but vegetable gardens.
So I know, Leslie, you said they were omnivores earlier, not just carnivores. So maybe you can give us a little bit of info on that.
Great question. Yes, they can develop some interesting favorite foods in the vegetable garden. Some root vegetables, they'll play with pumpkins. Some of the items they might not be eating, but they'll definitely steal them and play with them. So if you do have a vegetable garden and you're looking for some ways to wildlife proof and, make it non-accessible to the wildlife, please do reach out. And I mean, Marnie might have some strategies and tips for those too. But yes, they absolutely love the animals that come and feed on the vegetables too.
Yeah, definitely the rabbits have gotten my garden on more than one occasion. So.
I mean, essentially, they are animals of opportunity. If you give them the opportunity, they're going to show up.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And hopefully we answered that question. And certainly if you have any questions that are further to that, we can help you find ways to wild-proof your garden. So was that our last question, or has any more come in?
So there's a few, it's kind of a repeat here, but should I be scared of coyotes for myself? So should I be afraid of coyotes at all? And why are the canine wildlife protected animals? I almost had to move. So just.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. And to the first question of should you be afraid, and I'm hoping throughout the presentation, the questions that we've answered tonight, that certainly you're feeling a little bit more secure in your knowledge of coyotes and coyote behavior and the science that's there, the aversion techniques, and really knowing that you have municipal partners here with the town of Oakville and our partnership with Coyote Watch Canada and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We're certainly all working together to make sure that this community is safe. We will continue to do that and have that partnership and investigate any concerns and use that reporting form, because it really does help us spot where coyotes are, where they're being sighted. We're looking at trends, we're looking at areas of interest. So make sure that you're using that reporting form and attaching those videos and photos whenever possible so we can identify individuals. So hopefully you have a greater sense of security knowing that you don't have to fear these animals. I think knowledge goes a long way in providing power and confidence and having that big voice and making sure that you have those hazing techniques. As far as the other question, and sorry, that was really more along the lines of moving protection. Canine protection. So maybe Eva can shed a little bit more light on that from the ministry standpoint of protection from these animals. And I know maybe this also goes to moving animals and relocating. I know that's been a common question in the past, and maybe you can touch on that as well.
Okay, I can try. I'm not sure if the question was related to why are coyotes in general protected. Like, they are protected under the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act, as are the majority of wildlife found in Ontario. When we were talking about relocation, relocation isn't an option for coyotes, and not only coyotes but most wildlife. We have a restricted release location, and that's to prevent spread of diseases and parasites, to give the animal its best chance of survival by ensuring that it's released within or in close proximity to its home range, to reduce the potential for it becoming a problem where it's relocated to, and also to ensure that carrying capacity isn't surpassed in a certain area. Also, these relocation, these animals are highly mobile and can travel long distances over the course of a few days. So I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Well, I think you certainly answered part of it, and maybe it's something that Leslie had touched on a little earlier. I recall her talking about coyotes being a keystone species, and really what that means to the environment and the ecology in Oakville. And I don't know, maybe Eva or Leslie, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit more on what that means and why it's so important to have this species as part of our community.
Eva, do you want me to do it?
I'll let
Leslie take that one.
whoever wants to start first.
Oh, thank you. So getting back to being a keystone species, coyotes are, again, fabulous at keeping those small rodent populations in check, also smaller mammal populations in check, and they're also cleaning up carrion and those hosts to ticks that, potential Lyme disease. So within that community, coyotes are eking out a living because there's viable food there. And as long as it's natural foods, everything is functioning as it should in the ecosystem. It's when we introduce and continuously provide those anthropogenic foods, which is a fancy word for that harmful handout, that can impact where these coyotes are hanging out and where they decide to live. And if it's a backyard somewhere, they might be passing through your backyard to get to that backyard. And if you happen to have a small dog out unattended, off leash, then there could be an incident. But I think what I gathered from the question, though, was that why are wild coyotes, protected? Again, reiterating what Eva said, wildlife falls under the Fish and Wildlife Act, but they're filling an important niche role in the community. Huge cities, Toronto, all cities across North America have healthy coyote populations among other wildlife species. And so removing that keystone species would have a huge cascade effect on the environment. And you cannot communities of this canid resilient, and they will, more new, maybe related individuals, maybe not related, will come and fill up that void in the landscape because of the viable food source that's there.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely such an important note to make, is that even if we were to either physically remove or have some sort of call, that they would be replaced. It's only a matter of time before another coyote moves in. And I remember one time, Leslie, where you had mentioned, you can train the coyote you have. If you have one that you need to haze and you get it to a point where you've taught it to be wild and to act appropriately, if you remove that, you may introduce a whole new problem and potentially even a worse problem. So managing what you have is probably one of the best ways to deal with it. And once you've got it to a manageable point, and then we can all coexist in a responsible way. So did we have any other questions come in, Brett? Looks like we have one more.
Yeah, so what is being done to coyotes with mange?
So that is a great question. And Leslie, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Excellent question. Sarcoptic mange, the definitive test for that is actually a deep skin scraping, but visually we can assume that a coyote has sarcoptic mange because there is hair loss, but that can also be caused by rodenticide use, chemical exposure, a lot of different issues. Also, human food can impact their immune system and cause issues like hair loss and so forth. But essentially what happens, I know that the response officers, depending on who is available and what the plan is, we had a report. I'm sure some of you folks remember the coyote with the bulging eyes. We were trying very hard, working in partnership with the Milton Oakville Humane. Unfortunately, we couldn't locate that coyote to do a rescue and an assessment. So those animals, for the most part, if it's possible, there would be a deployment, a rescue effort. Sometimes, though, an animal is very mobile, and even if they look to you sickly, they're still going to flee with those rescue attempts. And it's not like in the movies. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of personnel and boots on the ground to actually accomplish that. But the town of Oakville is really great at doing that medical rescue for intervention.
Thanks, Leslie. And I think I'll look behind me I have Caitlin Jones here, who's a mobile compliance officer with us. And I recall one thing that Caitlin used to say to me is, it's so difficult to catch a healthy coyote that it's almost impossible. It's just not going to get done. But when they get sick or have mange, and I think about Jughead. I don't know if anybody remembers the story of the coyote that had the bottle on his head, but Caitlin was one of the officers that certainly helped in the capture of that coyote. And we'll use, certainly the Oakville Milton District Humane Society, and they partner with other animal rescue agencies, and we'll send them out for treatment and re-release. So we certainly are working towards having a healthy population, because if it is a healthy population, it's likely to be less intrusive in our lives. So hopefully we answered that question. Brett, did we have any more?
So it goes back to food sources. So our dogs and cats are already a food source that attracts coyotes. What else can we do in our own backyards to protect us?
Fantastic question. So I will actually look to our officers to respond to this. And Marnie, did you want to take the first stab at this one?
I guess. Unexpected, sorry. I didn't know I was going to have to talk tonight, so
I like
I
to
was
keep
just
you on
here
your
as a
toes.
face of enforcement. I didn't realize I was going to have to speak. So the one thing is, I mean, you have to keep your under property standards and lot maintenance. You can't have situations on your property that could harbor any sort of vermin, because if you do, you're going to attract coyotes. Compost that's not maintained properly is going to attract rodents, little chippies and everything else. You're going to attract the coyotes to come for those kinds of things. There's a lot of things under property standards and lot maintenance that we can do to keep properties at a minimum. Maybe Sean can help me with this, because again, I was not expecting to have to answer an actual question.
I do like to keep you on your toes every once in a while.
Yeah, we just have to. You can have your bird feeders; they have to be maintained. You can have your firewood; it has to be maintained. Like everything has to be maintained to a certain standard. You can have your gardens and everything else. They can't become overgrown. You can't let the fruit rot on the ground, because that attracts the smaller vermin, then that attracts the bigger, and it escalates from there.
Perfect. Thank
I
you,
guess
Marty. I think that's wonderful.
I
And
apologize. Again, I did not expect to have to answer a question.
No,
I'm sorry.
And I think that really just reiterates everything we've been talking about tonight is just the importance of that property maintenance and keeping your property clean and maintaining those bird feeders, having the right catch on the bottom of it, making sure those trees are cleaned up. You know, it's prevention of feeding, whether it be on purpose or inadvertently. Sean, did you want to add anything to that, or did we cover it all?
We definitely covered it in terms of private property, but we also touched earlier in the presentation about dogs off leash. And I'm sure Leslie will speak to a coyote will now recognize when being chased by a dog that dog becomes a threat. And in terms of whether the dog or cat is in a private rear yard or in public parkland, the coyote at some point may have been chased by that dog and now sees that dog as a threat and won't recognize that a chain link fence, a solid board fence is the difference between the spaces. So just to touch on why maybe a dog or a cat in terms of the coyote might look at them differently. Maybe somewhere down the line it was chased off leash in a park or in a ravine system and a trail system.
Yeah, and that's an important note. I remember earlier, Leslie was saying that they remember these things, and you know they're going to remember that experience and potentially even that dog. So definitely something to note, as well as the fact that they can climb and jump. Same with fox, and we had that photo of the fox climbing the fence. So certainly very agile animals. Did we have any more questions, Brett?
So along the question about property management, what about keeping our trails and parklands clean? Really disappointed with the garbage that's currently present on the trails.
Yeah, I can say this is a question that comes in quite often and is certainly reported through our Coyote reporting system. People dumping household garbage at garbage cans has been a problem. Certainly other animals will rip those bags apart. It'll attract coyotes and rats and raccoons and skunk and really all the wildlife you can think of. It absolutely is an issue. I know Margaret has worked with our partners in the Parks Department, especially in coyote areas where we know that there may be a family, to put lids on them that can prevent sort of raccoons from going into the bin and pulling out garbage. So if you see this type of behavior where people are illegally dumping or the garbage cans are overflowing or you know wildlife is getting into the cans, please report it to the town. And we can work with our partners in parks to have it cleaned up and see if there's any measures we can put in place to mitigate that kind of animal behavior. So absolutely report that. I think we're coming close to our last 15 minutes of our meeting tonight. So if you have any last minute questions, please get them in now. I think Brett has, no, no more? All right, looks like we've come to the end of the questions from members of the public tonight, and I'm going to throw one out there that had come in at our public meeting that we had not too long ago, and I'm going to look to Jim to answer this one because it really was about firearms and the use of firearms within the town, and can people discharge firearms to deal with a coyote that they believe is a problem. And Jim, can you elaborate on the use of firearms in the town?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Selena, and thank you for the question. I think that becomes a very dangerous question. It did come up at our last meeting, and as we know, when you discharge a firearm, the bullet coming out of the muzzle of that gun is going at a very high velocity, and where you're aiming doesn't mean that's where the bullet's going to end up. And in an urban environment like ours, that can easily end up in somebody's house, in somebody's backyard, in a playground. So firing a weapon in an urban setting is never an option. We do have, of course, bylaws against it, but I think just from a reasonability standard, it's something we would never want to see, and certainly certainly not to deal with coyotes.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. And I think further to that, there's certainly some cruelty issues when it comes to trying to take care of wildlife on your own. There are requirements, and Eva, I don't know whether or not you want to speak to any regs at that level. I'm not sure if they're under you or if they're.
So the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act does provide provisions to landowners to protect their properties from wildlife damage. So a landowner on their own property or an agent of the landowner can capture, kill, or harass wildlife that is damaging, or if they believe unreasonable grounds is about to damage their property. There's certain things. I mean, poisons, adhesives are strictly prohibited under the Act. And I mean, you can only take so many, you can't take more wildlife than necessary to protect your property. So.
Thank you, Eva. That's fantastic. It's nice to know what your rights are. And I think it's important for people to know, too, that most of us don't have the skills or ability. Obviously, firearms are out of the question. It's not even an option that's within the town of Oakville. And I'm going to actually ask Caitlin Jones to come up and speak to this a little bit further. Caitlin is our sort of animal expert. She was also with the Oakville Milton District Humane Society before, so she's got a great deal of experience in animal welfare. So I'm just going to have her speak to sort of that cruelty aspect of it.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So something to consider, especially when it comes to wildlife or any animal, there is not only municipal, provincial, and federal legislation in place that speaks to causing distress or permitting distress to an animal. That's all encompassing. It's not just speaking to home pets, it's also speaking to wildlife. So when we're speaking about discharging a firearm or, in all components of that definition, whether it's paintball guns or slingshots or anything like that, you can't do anything to intentionally harm an animal, to cause distress, any pain, any suffering, anything like that. And like I said, that can be addressed on all levels of legislation as well. So when you speak to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act, yes, you have the authority to do that, but it has to be instantaneous and irreversible. So if you miss and you cause distress, then you could be in a lot of trouble legislatively as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin, for that clarification. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there's, it's a very complicated question when we talk about, dispatching wildlife on your own property. So hopefully we've shed some light on that, and the use of firearms is definitely a no. So did we have any other questions come in, Brett? No? So it looks like we've come to the end of our questions then, and we're pretty much to the end of our evening. It's now almost 20 after 8. So I think at this point we will conclude this session. I hope everybody enjoyed our evening tonight. I hope it was informative and you were able to learn something and take something away, whether it be about aversion conditioning or how to manage your backyard, just to how to coexist with wildlife in general, or about that procedure. Please have a look at our website. We have a lot of information there when it comes to learning about coyote behavior. We have an interactive program there you can go through and learn about coyote behavior, as well as the the procedure as well. So please have a look at that. Use our Coyote reporting form. I can't express how important that is for us to have that information, to do the trending, to evaluate areas that need our attention, and to conduct those investigations, and really that public information, whether it be signage or door-to-door information. So again, if you have any questions, you can email us at enforcement@oakville.ca. If there's any requests for property standards or lot maintenance, service@oakville.ca, or give the general line a call at 905-845-6601. We're happy to help you in any way that we can. Thank you very much to our partners here tonight, Leslie from Coyote Watch Canada, and Eva Bobeck from the Ministry of Natural Resource and Forestry, and Jim and Sean and Marnie and Caitlin and Margaret. Thank you all for your expertise. It was great listening to all of you, and I hope everybody's able to take something away tonight. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed the session.
Good night, everyone.